Hi guys, and welcome to Calm Night Radio Channel. Tonight we slip into the English colonies in the year 1670, where the air smells of wet earth, wood smoke, and salt, and where a vast human tragedy is still taking shape in ways that many people around you refuse to name plainly. You arrive at a moment when black life is not yet defined by one single rule everywhere, but the net is tightening, knot by knot, colony by colony. You can feel it in the nervous glances, in the clipped orders, in the ledgers, in the careful way people speak when power is in the room. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And while you are here, comment below with your location and your local time. Now, dim the lights and let yourself step onto a shoreline where hope, fear, calculation, and cruelty all stand together in the same humid dawn. You begin at the edge of the Chesapeake, where the morning mist hangs low over muddy banks and half-built wharves. The water moves with a slow, heavy confidence, carrying tobacco ships, rumours, insects, and disease in equal measure. The colony looks rough and unfinished. Tree stumps jut from the ground. Fences lean at strange angles. Smoke rises from brick chimneys and crude cabins. Nothing feels settled except the ambition of the people who want to grow rich here. You do not arrive in a world that fully understands itself. That is part of the horror. In 1670, race-based slavery is not yet organised with the same neat legal confidence it will later claim. But the direction is unmistakable. Plantation owners want labour they can control for life. Colonial officials want order. Merchants want profit. And black men, women, and children are caught inside that widening machine, even while some customs still remain inconsistent from one place to another. That uncertainty can sound almost hopeful for a second. It is not. Uncertainty in such a place is rarely freedom. It means your life may depend on a local court, a master's mood, a missing paper, a dead witness, or a neighbour who suddenly decides your skin colour settles the matter. Sleep does not come easily in that kind of world. You learn fast. You walk past a landing place where barrels are stacked in damp rows, tobacco leaves dry in sheds, giving off a sharp, bitter smell that clings to clothes and hair. Nearby, black labourers move under watchful eyes. Some were born in Africa and carry memories of homelands across the Atlantic. Some have spent years in the colonies already. A few may still hope to bargain, serve a term, or claim some narrow protection through baptism, custom, or local ambiguity, but those paths are closing, quietly, efficiently. The mainstream fact sitting beneath everything is this: by the late 17th century, colonial planters were increasingly shifting from reliance on European indentured servants toward enslaved African labour, especially in plantation regions tied to export crops like tobacco. You can almost hear the logic in every conversation about acreage, mortality, and cost. It is the logic of people turning human beings into long-term investment. Very elegant on paper, deeply monstrous in practice. You notice that the colony runs on paper almost as much as sweat. Deeds, court orders, cargo lists, wills, baptismal records, punishments, tax rolls. Ink helps build a cage. A man with a pen and a seal can change the course of a family more thoroughly than a storm. A line in a ledger can reduce a person to value measured alongside livestock, tools, and land. Civilized. They call it. Colonial society loves a polite word for ugly things. The people with power do not usually wake each morning and announce that they are inventing a brutal racial order. They talk instead about labour shortages, discipline, inheritance, stability, conversion, property, and safety. These words float through meeting houses and private dining rooms with the smell of roasted meat and spilled ale. Yet beneath the language lies a simple and devastating choice. They are deciding that black people can be made permanently vulnerable, and that this vulnerability can be profitable. As you move inland, the roads become little more than tracks cut through forest and clay. Wheels sink, boots collect mud, mosquitoes whine in the reeds. The houses of wealthier planters stand apart, larger and better supplied, though still far from luxurious by modern standards. Around them cluster kitchens, sheds, workyards, and quarters. A plantation is not only a farm, it is a system of command. The geography itself teaches hierarchy. The big house sees. The labouring spaces are seen. Black life within this world is varied, but never secure. Some people work in tobacco fields, where the plants demand relentless attention. Some labour in kitchens, dairies, workshops, or on river landings. Some care for animals. Some haul timber. Some row boats through marshy creeks. A few may have specialised knowledge in carpentry, metalwork, herding, or boat handling. Skill can make a person useful. It does not make them safe. Touch matters here. Rough rope against the palm, damp linen sticking to the back, splinters from fence posts, clay packed under fingernails, the sting of gnats on the neck, the ache of shoulders after lifting casks or hoeing rows. Your body is never allowed to forget where it is. Even the air feels physical, presses on the skin with heat, salt, and the sour scent of labour. At night, sounds travel far. Frogs pulse in the marsh, dogs bark at shadows, wind rattles shutters. From a distance you may hear murmured voices from cabins or quarters, low and careful. Laughter sometimes appears, surprisingly bright, then vanishes. People still make jokes. Of course they do. Humour survives in places where dignity is under attack. Often it becomes sharper there. Not every black person in 1670 English America lives under exactly the same legal condition in every colony. This is one of the great complexities historians wrestle with. Status could vary based on place, parentage, religion, local custom, or the willingness of authorities to enforce one claim over another. Historians still argue over how far some early possibilities for limited mobility truly extended, and how exceptional those cases were. A few stories of landholding, court petitions, or eventual freedom exist, but they should not be mistaken for evidence of fairness. They are signs of a system not yet fully standardized, not signs of a humane one. That uncertainty is paired with a more chilling certainty. The colonial elite are learning from each experiment. Every disputed case helps clarify the next rule. Every conflict about labour pushes the law toward greater hardness. Every planter who fears running out of servants looks toward African labour as a solution that can be inherited through generations. This is the decade when improvisation starts becoming structure. You pass a churchyard where the bell gives a dull iron note over the trees. Christianity is present everywhere in official language, though not always in official mercy. Some colonists insist that baptism should not necessarily change a black person's status. That matters because conversion could, in another moral universe, imply spiritual equality. The planters are not interested in that kind of inconvenience. They prefer a faith that comforts the master while leaving the captive in place. Very practical religion, remarkably selective. Yet belief moves in more than one direction. Among black people, faith may carry memories from West and Central Africa, private prayers, protective gestures, healing knowledge, songs, and fragments of sacred rhythm that survive despite rupture. A quirky detail sometimes missed in broad retellings is how much colonial observers misunderstood what they saw. A charm, bead, spoken phrase, or pattern of care might be dismissed as superstition by Europeans, while holding deep meaning within African traditions. The record often sneers at what it fails to understand. You come to a yard where women tend cooking pots over open fire. The smell is rich with cornmeal, smoke, onions, and whatever meat can be stretched into broth. Children linger nearby, alert and quiet by turns. One woman balances authority and caution in the same posture. She stirs the pot, answers a question, watches a doorway, and scans the mood of the yard without seeming to move much at all. That, too, is labour. Invisible to the ledger perhaps, but central to survival. Family life exists here, even when the law treats it carelessly. Affection exists, courtship exists, parenting exists, friendship exists, shared memory exists. People name children, bury loved ones, tease one another, grieve in private, and create routines that make life feel human. This matters because slavery does not merely exploit labour. It tries to reduce personhood. Every act of ordinary care pushes against that reduction. The colony, however, is built to interrupt such bonds. Sale, debt, death, relocation, punishment, and whim can separate people with terrifying ease. Disease also hovers over everything. Malaria, dysentery, smallpox, and other illnesses cut through communities with little warning. The 17th century is unkind to nearly everyone in the Chesapeake, but it is especially merciless to those with the least control over shelter, food, movement, and medical care. Mortality is high. So is denial. You keep walking and notice how often black people are watched. Watched while unloading cargo. Watched while carrying tools. Watched while speaking to one another. Watched in markets. Watched near roads. Surveillance here is not always formal, but it is constant. A white colonist of modest status may possess little wealth and still feel entitled to monitor a black person's movement. Race is becoming a social rank that even the poor can be invited to police. That invitation will prove durable. This social reshaping matters because the colonies are unstable in many ways. There are tensions between large landowners and small farmers, between elites and servants, between settlers and native nations, between frontier danger and coastal ambition. In that setting, ruling groups find racial division useful. It can redirect anger downward and outward. It can persuade struggling Europeans that they share more with wealthy planters than with black labourers enduring similar exploitation. The trick is old, the consequences last. Around midday, the sun grows fierce enough to flatten colour. Fields shimmer, sweat runs into eyes. A cartwheel creaks with desperate rhythm. Somewhere an overseer calls out, not loudly, because true authority rarely needs to shout all day. The labour continues, hoeing, carrying, sorting, chopping, tending, fetching. Time is not measured by clocks for most workers. It is measured by light, tasks, and the body's dwindling strength. You may imagine resistance as dramatic, and sometimes it is. Flight, revolt, open refusal. But more often in a place like this, resistance is quieter, a slowed pace, a hidden tool, feigned confusion, preserved language, secret care for the sick, a warning pass from one person to another, a memory held intact. None of these are small when the system wants total control. Survival itself becomes a form of argument. There is another scholarly uncertainty here worth pausing over. Researchers continue to debate how quickly racial categories hardened in everyday thought compared with formal law. Did ordinary colonists fully absorb the ideology as it emerged, or did practice race ahead of explanation? The answer seems to shift by region and source. But standing here in 1670, you do not need a complete theory to sense the direction. The colony is teaching itself to see blackness as inheritable subordination, and it is getting better at the lesson. By late afternoon, the shadows lengthen across the yard. Smoke softens in the cooling air. Birds call from the tree line. For a fleeting moment, the land looks almost peaceful. That is the danger of beautiful evenings in violent systems. They let power masquerade as order. They let exploitation wear the mask of routine. You hear a soft conversation in a language the planter would not understand, and the sound itself feels precious. A pocket of selfhood, brief but real. You stand still long enough to notice something essential. Black Americans, Or rather, the black people who are becoming the earliest generations of that history are not passive figures waiting for history to happen to them. They're already shaping culture, labour systems, foodways, local knowledge, chilled rearing practices, and forms of endurance that the colonies depend on while refusing to honour. Their forced presence transforms the world around them. The colonies cannot function without them. Even as the same colonies attempt to deny their full humanity, night settles slowly. The insects grow louder. Firelight flickers against rough wood walls. Somewhere a baby fusses, then calms. Somewhere a man stares into darkness, counting dangers and possibilities with equal care. Somewhere a woman repeats a name from far across the Atlantic so it will not disappear. The future is not visible to them in full. It is only felt as pressure, threat, and stubborn life. And that may be the truest way to understand 1670. You're not witnessing a finished institution. You're witnessing the hardening of one. The categories are still being hammered into place, but the blows are already landing on human bodies. Profit is learning to speak the language of permanence. Law is learning to serve appetite. Society is learning to sort people by colour with increasing confidence. And black people, in the middle of that gathering storm, are learning one another, protecting fragments of dignity, and living with a courage that rarely receives the softness it deserves. The colony grows quiet, though never truly silent. Smoke, river damp, and the scent of trampled tobacco linger in the dark. You breathe them in, you listen. You remember that this world was made by choices, not by accident, and that the people forced to endure it were always more than the system that tried to contain them. The day begins before the sky makes up its mind. You wake in darkness that smells of ash, damp straw, old boards, and human breath. For a moment there is only the faint hiss of a dying fire and the rustle of someone shifting nearby. Then a cough breaks the stillness. A baby whimpers once. Outside, somewhere in the yard, a rooster tries his luck with the morning far too early, as if noise alone can drag the sun upward. No one laughs. The body already knows what is coming. You rise into air that feels cool for only a few brief minutes. The floor under your feet is hard, uneven, and gritty with dust. A hand reaches for a garment hung on a peg or folded on a crate. Linen, coarse wool, patched cloth, whatever has survived washing, weather, and labour. The fabric scratches the skin. It never quite dries right in this climate. It carries the smell of smoke, sweat, and the river. Breakfast is often small and functional, not a meal meant to delight. A little cornmeal, perhaps made into mush. Leftover broth if there was any from the previous night. Sometimes cold scraps, sometimes almost nothing. Hunger does not always arrive as a dramatic pang. Often it sits inside you like a slow, hollow note, steady and familiar. By sunrise, many people are already working with too little in their stomachs and too much expected of their limbs. As the light thickens, the work divides by season, place, age, and the demands of the household or plantation in tobacco country. The crop rules the year with a fussy, exhausting tyranny. Tobacco is one of those plants that acts delicate while making everyone around it miserable. Seeds must be tended, seedlings transplanted, weeds pulled, worms picked off leaves, soil hoed and broken, plants topped at the right moment, leaves cut, carried, cured, sorted, packed. Each stage asks for timing and care. Every mistake threatens money. That means every worker carries the planter's anxiety as an extra burden. You head into the fields while the morning still holds some softness. Dew wets the hem of your clothes and darkens the earth. Insects lift from the plants in tiny clouds. The smell is green, bitter, and slightly sweet. It settles on your hands. Rows stretch ahead in a disciplined pattern that seems almost calm until your back bends into the labour and stays there. Hoeing is rhythmic, but never gentle. The tool jars through wrist and elbow. Dirt clings to ankles. Sunlight climbs. So does fatigue. The pace is relentless because agricultural labour here is tied to profit far away. Tobacco grown in these fields is not for local pleasure alone. It is packed into hogsheads, loaded onto ships, and sent across the Atlantic into a wider commercial world. That mainstream fact shapes everything. A worker in Virginia or Maryland may never see London, Bristol, or Amsterdam, yet their body is linked to merchants, insurers, shippers, and consumers they will never know. The empire reaches down into the row of plants through the ache in your shoulders. Field labour is not the only labour, though planters often speak as if it were the whole story. On any large property there is also skilled work that keeps the place functioning. Someone repairs barrels, someone tends livestock, someone cooks for the household and work gang, someone cleans tools, mends clothes, fetches water, carries wood, salts meat, skims kettles, washes linen, tends fires, nurses children, and hauls away waste. The colony runs on tasks that never make grand speeches. It still cannot survive without them. In the kitchen yard, morning has its own rhythm. You hear the thud of splitting wood, the scrape of iron against pot, the sharp splash of water dumped from a bucket. Smoke rolls low from a cooking fire and catches in the throat. Eyes water, hands move quickly. Corn is ground, porridge stirred. A bit of pork or fish may be stretched with peas, beans, onions, pumpkins, or whatever the season allows. The cook must judge heat by feel and sight, not by dial or clock. Every meal is part chemistry, part endurance. You may notice that women's labour is often doubled. A woman can be expected to work in the fields, then prepare food, mend clothing, wash, care for children, tend the sick, and answer sudden commands from the household. The colony likes to pretend this is natural order. Very convenient, that phrase. It lets exploitation dress itself as common sense. Yet the effort required is extraordinary. It demands memory, attention, physical stamina, and emotional control in a place that offers little rest. Children work too, though their duties vary. A smaller child may carry water, gather kindling, mind infants, scare birds from gardens, or run messages. An older child may weed, herd animals, shell peas, card wool, or learn whatever labour the adults need most. Childhood exists, but it is narrow and fragile. Play happens in edges and scraps. A game may be invented with stones, sticks, or a rag ball, then broken off at once when an order comes. The sound of laughter can vanish like smoke in wind. There is always movement. To the field, to the well, to the smokehouse, to the landing, to the dairy, to the loft, to the storehouse. Feet press familiar paths into the soil until the ground itself seems to remember who walks it most. Bare feet toughen. Shoes, when available. Rub blisters anyway. Your hands develop calluses thick enough to seem like another material layered over the skin. The body adapts because it must. That adaptation is not consent. It is survival. A curious tidbit hides in the work of tobacco itself. The leaves are so sticky with resin during handling that workers can absorb nicotine through their skin, especially in wet conditions. People in the 17th century would not describe this in modern medical terms, of course, but they knew the crop could make labourers feel weak, sick, dizzy, or strange. The plant that built fortunes could also leave the people cultivating it nauseated and trembling. Tobacco was profitable, demanding, and faintly poisonous, which feels oddly fitting for a colonial obsession. By midday, the heat becomes a presence with its own personality. It presses downward on head, neck, and shoulders. Shirts cling. Air seems to stop moving. The field loses its early freshness and takes on the dense odour of hot leaves, disturbed soil, sweat, and insects. Flies gather. Gnats hover at the eyes. You wipe your face with a forearm and leave a stripe of dirt across your cheek. Water, if available, tastes warm from the bucket. You drink anyway. In some places there is a brief pause for food, but pause does not mean ease. People squat in shade if they can find it. Bowls are passed. Cornbread crumbles in tired hands. A spoon scrapes the bottom of a pot. Conversation stays measured because energy is limited and ears may be listening. Even so, there are moments of human texture. Someone mutters a joke about the planter's vanity. Someone shares a trick for keeping flies off. Someone hums under their breath. Community often survives in fragments rather than speeches. Not every labour setting looks the same. Near ports and river landings, black workers may spend the day unloading goods, rolling casks, stacking barrels, ferrying items by boat, or helping with rope and sail. River work has its own dangers. Wood gets slick, cargo shifts, mud sucks at boots, mosquitoes breed in the reeds. The water smells brackish and alive, part salt, part rot, part current. A slip on a dock can mean injury, ridicule, or worse. Yet these places also bring information. Ships carry gossip, accents, prices, news of war, and whispers of distant places. In towns, though towns are still small by later standards, some black people labour in artisan settings. They may assist blacksmiths, coopers, carpenters, or brickmakers. Skilled work can make a person indispensable, and that sometimes creates room for bargaining over treatment or tasks. Sometimes that word has to do a lot of work in colonial history. A skilled hand may earn trust in one moment and punishment in the next. Utility can improve conditions a little. It cannot erase captivity. The body learns to read moods as carefully as tools. You notice the overseer's walk, the mistress's tone, the moment a master has been drinking, the expression that means a demand is coming, the silence that means anger is still gathering. This emotional labour is constant and rarely acknowledged. It can be as draining as lifting or hoeing, because it requires endless calculation. Speak or stay quiet, move faster or appear steady, ask or do not ask, look down or meet the eye briefly. Every choice has risk. Historians still dispute some details about the exact organisation of daily labour in smaller households compared with larger plantations during this period. Records can be uneven, and not every property left behind a neat account book. Some evidence suggests harsher gang-style coordination in certain places, while other sites depended on more fluid task arrangements shaped by season and household need. But uncertainty in the paperwork should not fool you into imagining leisure. Whether labour was tightly synchronised or endlessly improvised, the demand was heavy and the control was real. Afternoon brings the slow brutality of repetition. Another row, another bucket, another armful of wood, another turn of the grinding stone, another shirt rinsed and wrung, another kettle scrubbed with sand, another child hushed, another fence rail lifted into place. The colony is built by tasks so repetitive they almost erase themselves from official memory. Great men later boast about settlements, trade, and political development. They seldom pause to mention who hauled the water while doing it. The sensory world keeps recording everything. Splinters under the finger, smoke woven into hair, the metallic smell of wet tools, a wasp circling the rim of a bowl, sweat drying into salt on the lips, mud cooling between the toes for one accidental second before the ground turns hard again, the creak of leather straps, the flutter of pigeons startled from a roof, a child's sleepy head leaning against a shoulder at dusk. History is not only laws and prices, it is also texture. Toward evening, indoor work intensifies for some. Supper must be cooked, floors swept, trenches cleaned, candles trimmed if there are candles to spare. Laundry may still hang, needing to be brought in before night damp settles. Infants need feeding, sore muscles need rubbing, cuts need washing with whatever can be found. Some medicinal knowledge comes from Europe, some from Africa, some from native exchange, and some from pure experiment born of necessity. A poultice, herb, or brewing method may travel quietly from one pair of hands to another without ever entering polite written history. There is scholarly debate as well over how much autonomy enslaved and unfree labourers had in tending small garden plots, or raising minor provisions at certain sites this early. In some places, people likely carved out little spaces to grow food or herbs, especially where owners wanted to reduce provisioning costs. In other places, that opportunity was far narrower. The evidence changes from colony to colony, but wherever a patch of earth could be claimed, even briefly, it mattered. Growing one onion, one bean vine, one handful of greens could mean one less sharp edge of hunger. As daylight thins, the body enters a strange state beyond simple tiredness. The limbs feel heavy yet still moving. Thoughts become slower, then suddenly sharp again when danger appears. Evening sounds replace daytime labour noises. Crickets begin. Frogs answer from wet ground. A wooden bucket knocks softly against a well curb. Smoke drifts sweeter now that cooking is underway. The sky turns from brass to violet. For a few breaths, the world feels suspended. Then the last tasks arrive, because of course they do. Animals must be checked, embers banked, tools stored, a garment mended by poor light, a child settled, a sore ankle wrapped. Someone may whisper a prayer in English in an African tongue, or in a blend of both thought and memory. Someone may sing very softly, more breath than melody. The song is not for performance, it is for endurance, and that is what a day of labour reveals most clearly in 1670. Work is not just effort here, it is discipline, surveillance, timing, hunger, adaptation, and forced usefulness woven together from dawn to dark. Yet inside that pressure, people still create skill, humour, care, and fleeting moments of self-possession. They do not become machines, though the colony would clearly prefer that arrangement. They remain human in the middle of being used as if they were not. When night finally closes in, the relief is real but incomplete. Muscles throb even at rest. Hands still remember the handle of the hoe, the bucket rope, the spoon, the broom, the knife, the spindle, the mallet. Sleep comes near, then hesitates. Tomorrow is already standing at the door, barefoot and impatient. By 1670, the colony has learned a useful trick. It takes violence, dresses it in legal language, and calls the result order. You can feel this trick at work long before you read a single statute. It lives in the careful way people speak about status, in the way a court clerk pauses over a name, in the way a landowner explains who belongs to whom as if discussing fences or cattle. The law does not descend from heaven in one finished block. It gathers piece by piece, like a storm assembling from separate winds. You step into a courthouse that smells of ink, damp wool, candle grease, and old wood. Boots scrape the floorboards, papers crackle. Men talk in low, confident voices, the kind used by people accustomed to being believed. Light from narrow windows falls across tables, hats, ledgers, and tired faces waiting to learn what their lives are worth in the eyes of others. This room is not grand, but it is powerful. A great many colonial tragedies are made in buildings that look almost modest. The legal world of the English colonies in 1670 is still uneven from place to place. That unevenness can seem confusing, even slippery. One colony may word things differently from another. One magistrate may lean one way, another in the opposite direction. A case may turn on custom, religion, testimony, parentage, or a document no one can produce. Yet beneath all that variation, one broad change is taking shape. Blackness is being linked more firmly to perpetual servitude, while whiteness is being linked more firmly to social protection and legal standing. This does not happen because colonial lawmakers enjoy philosophical consistency. Quite the opposite. They're often messy thinkers, but they're practical in one particular sense. They want labour that stays. They want children born into conditions that benefit owners. They want fewer disputes over who owes years and who owes a lifetime. They want a system that can be inherited like land. Once you understand that hunger for predictability, the law starts to look less confusing. It is improvising its way toward permanent exploitation. One of the most important shifts concerns inherited status. The colony is increasingly drawn to the idea that a child can be born into unfreedom if the mother is enslaved. This is a cold, efficient rule. It turns women's bodies into engines of wealth for owners. It transforms birth itself into a transfer of property value. You do not need a dramatic speech to see what that means. A cradle becomes part of the plantation economy. A newborn is watched not only with human feeling, but with calculation. There is something especially chilling about legal language when it pretends to be neutral. A clerk scratches words onto paper, a judge nods, a witness swears something, the sentence settles, and from that moment a family's future may narrow for generations. No trumpet sounds, no villain twirls a moustache. The cruelty is administrative. Colonial power often prefers that style. Open brutality is expensive and messy. A rule on parchment can do the work more quietly. You hear discussion of baptism as well. In another moral universe, baptism might suggest spiritual equality, or at least a serious challenge to the idea of permanent human ownership. But colonial lawmakers and planters are quick to protect their interests from such inconvenient theology. Conversion may be encouraged in theory while carefully prevented from changing legal status in practice. The soul may be welcomed, provided the body remains profitable. It is an impressive bit of hypocrisy, almost athletic in its flexibility. The sensory world of law is strange. It is not only the scratch of quills and the murmur of proceedings, it is also the smell of wet cloaks brought in from rain, the waxy scent of candles softening in the heat, the stiffness of a bench beneath tired legs, the cold draught that slips under a badly fitted door. The body feels the law before it understands the wording. Waiting in such a room can tighten the chest more than any sermon. A mainstream fact runs through this entire moment. During the 17th century, colonies like Virginia and Maryland passed laws that increasingly defined slavery as hereditary, racialized, and permanent. Those laws did not appear all at once, and they were refined over time. But the trend is unmistakable. What you are witnessing in 1670 is a legal order hardening around the needs of plantation society. The law is becoming less interested in ambiguity, and are more interested in ownership that reproduces itself. The men writing these rules often describe them as necessary for peace. That word comes up often, peace. By peace they usually mean predictability for property holders, not justice for the vulnerable. If a black labourer runs away, the law must answer. If a servant resists, the law must answer. If a mixed household complicates inheritance, the law must answer. If poor white colonists and black labourers begin to look too similar in condition, the law must answer that too, and do so in a way that pushes them apart. That last point matters deeply. Colonial elites are not just building a labour system, they are building a social ladder. The ladder must convince even struggling whites that their skin grants them a place above black people, however poor they may be. Law helps create that feeling. It draws lines, then teaches people to defend them. A small privilege granted to one group can become a wall around another. It is a clever method for preventing solidarity. Ugly, but clever. You might notice how often punishment appears beside property in legal thinking. Lawmakers do not simply define status. They decide who can be whipped, who can testify, who can bear arms, who can gather, who can travel, who can marry with recognition, who can own, who can inherit, who can strike back, and who must endure. Each decision may look narrow on its own. Together they form a climate. In that climate, one group breathes more freely while another is taught to inhale with permission. Some rules concern mobility. A black person moving without authorization may attract suspicion at once. Roads become legal spaces, not merely physical ones. Crossing a county line, appearing at a market, visiting a spouse on another property, or being found after dark can all invite questioning. Freedom of movement is easy to romanticize when you have it. When you do not, distance itself becomes a weapon. Even a short journey can feel like entering a field of traps. Inside the legal archive there are odd and revealing details. A quirky example is how colonial records sometimes label people with frustrating consistency. The same individual might be described in one place by name, in another by origin, in another by colour, and in another by status. These shifting labels were not harmless sloppiness. They reveal a society still manufacturing the categories it wants to treat as natural. The paperwork wobbles because the ideology is still under construction, even while its consequences are already severe. Women face particular danger under this tightening order. The law may not always speak of them in openly dramatic terms, yet it places them at the centre of inheritance, labour, and sexual vulnerability. A black woman's body can be treated as a site of work, reproduction, punishment, and profit all at once. Colonial records are often evasive about this, which tells you something by itself. Official language tends to grow blurry around the very abuses it benefits from. Children, too, are pulled into legal thought with startling coldness. Rather than asking what kind of world a child needs, lawmakers ask what status the child carries, what labour may eventually be extracted, and who has claim over future years. That shift is profound. Childhood is not merely shortened by hardship, it is recoded as an economic category. You can almost hear the silence around that fact in polite colonial conversation. Some truths are so ugly, they are handled only through euphemism. Historians still debate how quickly ordinary people absorbed these emerging racial laws into daily assumptions. Did the law change minds first? Or did social practice push lawmakers to formalize prejudices already spreading through the colony? The answer probably differs by region, household, and decade. Legal codes do not invent every cruelty from scratch. Sometimes they ratify habits already underway. At other times they sharpen them. In either case, the result is the same for those caught beneath the change. Life becomes narrower, danger more predictable. You stand outside after court lets out and hear the world return. Cartwheels groan in the mud, a horse stamps and snorts, a gull cries from the river. Smoke from nearby chimneys mixes with the sharp smell of tanned leather and wet dirt. Men leave the courthouse talking about acreage, debts, and weather, as if what happened inside were merely routine. For them, perhaps it is. That is part of the terror. Systems become enduring not only when they are cruel, but when they become ordinary. The law also helps shape memory. Once a rule is written, later generations may imagine it was always obvious. They may assume the categories were fixed from the beginning, as if the colony sprang into existence fully committed to racial slavery in its mature form. But standing here in 1670, you can sense the joints and seams. The system is being adjusted, reinforced, and argued over in real time. That does not make it less dangerous. In some ways, it makes it more so. You are watching people choose, quite consciously, what kind of society they want. And what kind do they want? One where labour can be inherited. One where racial lines prevent alliances across class. One where Christian scruples never interfere with profit for long. One where courts protect owners from uncertainty. One where black life can be enclosed by law so thoroughly that violence no longer needs to explain itself every morning. Once the rule exists, the whip can call itself enforcement rather than invention. There are still edges of uncertainty. Some people petition, some disputes confuse magistrates, some records fail to fit the pattern neatly. A baptism complicates a claim, a mixed ancestry prompts argument, a contract is missing, a prior owner dies, a rumour spreads that someone is entitled to years rather than life. These moments matter because they reveal the system under strain. Yet strain does not mean softness. It usually means the next law will arrive sharper. As daylight fades, you pass homes where candles begin to glow behind small panes or oiled cloth. Inside, planters may discuss legislation over supper, speaking in calm tones while steam rises from bowls. Their wives may ask about property and inheritance. Their neighbours may complain about servants, theft, or insolence. Out of such domestic conversations come public rules. The architecture of slavery is built not only in assemblies and courts, but also in dining rooms and counting houses. The great legal tightening of 1670 is not dramatic in the way people often imagine history should be. There is no single thunderclap. There is only the steady closing of exits. Rights shrink. Definitions harden. Exceptions become rarer. Ownership becomes more secure. Whiteness gathers privileges like dry kindling. Blackness is burdened with presumption, suspicion, and disposability. A society that could have chosen many paths is choosing this one with increasing confidence. Night settles over the colony, and the courthouse windows go dark, yet the decisions made there do not sleep. They travel outward into fields, cabins, kitchens, docks, nurseries, and roads. They settle into routines. They teach strangers how to rank one another. They tell a child what the world will allow. They tell a mother what may happen to her baby. They tell a man that skill will not save him from inherited status. They tell an owner that appetite can be made lawful, and so the silence of law becomes one of the loudest sounds in the colony. It is there in every permission denied, every path restricted, every family made precarious, every birth measured for profit. The ink dries, the paper is folded away, the damage continues. Home, in 1670, is a dangerous word. It suggests comfort, privacy, and control over the shape of your own evening. For black people in the English colonies, those things exist only in fragments, if at all. Still, the need for home does not disappear because the world is cruel. It becomes sharper, more inventive. You see it in the way a blanket is folded, in the care taken with a cooking pot, in the place where a child sleeps, in the effort to make one corner of a rough room feel a little less exposed to the wind. You enter a cabin at dusk when the light is turning thin and smoky. The structure is small, built quickly, and never quite finished in the way a grand planter's house claims to be finished. The walls may be made of logs, rough planks, wattle and daub, or whatever materials were available and cheap. Cracks run between boards, drafts slip through them with annoying confidence. The roof holds if you're lucky. If you're less lucky, rain finds its way inside and turns the floor to patches of damp earth and straw. The smell of the space is layered and intimate. Wood smoke sits in the rafters. Wet wool dries slowly near the fire. Ash cools in the hearth. A pot gives off onion, greens, or cornmeal. The sharper scent of sweat clings to clothing hung on pegs. There may be the faint sourness of damp bedding that never had a full day of sun. Babies, if present, add the sweet and weary smell of milk. A home like this records life in odours before it records it in memory. There is very little room to waste. A chest, a stool, a rough bedstead, a blanket, a gourd, a kettle, a bowl, maybe a small table if fortune has been unusually generous. Some cabins have almost nothing beyond the essentials. Others contain a few carefully guarded items with meaning beyond their use. A bead, a cloth, a carved object, a shell. A spoon kept longer than expected. A scrap of fabric saved because it belonged to someone loved. Objects matter differently when so little can truly be yours. A mainstream fact of colonial life is that housing for labourers was often crude, crowded, and built for utility rather than comfort, especially in plantation regions. That is the official logic. Shelter enough to keep people working, warmth enough to preserve labour value, space enough to sleep, perhaps cook, perhaps recover just enough to rise again. The system does not aim at dignity. Any dignity inside these walls has to be made by the people living there. You notice first how people arrange limited space with quiet intelligence. Bedding is lifted or rolled to make room during the day. Buckets are placed where drips are worst. Cloth is stuffed into gaps against cold drafts. A cracked pot is positioned to catch rain. Firewood is stacked close, but not so close that a spark will set everything blazing. There is skill in this management, though no one writing laws bothers to praise it. The colony depends heavily on the practical genius of the underhoused. Privacy is almost impossible. That fact changes the whole emotional climate of a room. If several people share one structure, then sleep, grief, illness, arguments, tenderness, and fear all happen within a few feet of one another. Voices are lowered because walls are thin. Silence itself becomes crowded. A married couple may have little space for affection. A mother soothing a child may also be trying not to wake everyone else. A person who wants only to be alone for 10 minutes may find such luxury rarer than meat. Touch becomes part of domestic architecture. Shoulder brushing shoulder in a narrow passage, hands meeting over a shared bowl. A child curled against an adult for warmth, feet tucked away from the edge of a blanket. The roughness of plank under the palm as someone steadies themselves in dim light. The texture of home is not softness here. It is closeness, scarcity, and the constant negotiation of bodies in confined space. Fire is at the centre of everything. It cooks food, dries clothes, gives light, and pushes back damp cold. It also threatens disaster at all times. In a tightly built wooden world, one stray spark can undo what little has been assembled. So the hearth is watched with care. Embers are banked, ashes shifted, smoke endured. Your eyes sting. Your clothes carry the scent into the next day. Yet people gather there because warmth is one of the few comforts that can be shared without permission. The sounds of these spaces tell their own story. A pot lid rattling. A low conversation cut short by footsteps outside. The soft rasp of mending. A child talking to themselves in that serious tone children use when inventing a whole world from scraps. Wind pushing at a badly fitted shutter. Coughing in the night. Too common and too familiar. Laughter appears sometimes, quick and bright, like a candle flare. It never sounds trivial. In such a place, laughter is labour saved from despair. You might expect a cabin to be purely bleak, and often it is, yet bleakness is not the whole truth. People decorate, though the word may feel too grand for the methods. A cloth is folded neatly over a shelf. A shell is set where light catches it. A bunch of herbs hangs drying from a beam. A sleeping place is arranged with visible care. A child is told not to scuff the one clean corner. These gestures do not change the structure, but they change the feeling of living inside it. That matters. A quirky detail often overlooked is how much colonial domestic life depended on improvisation with containers. Gourds, baskets, barrels, wooden bowls, clay pots, sacks, and woven carriers were endlessly repurposed. A cracked vessel might become storage. A broken barrel could be cut down for another use. Very little was thrown away if it could still hold. Carry, cover, or catch. In poor households and labourers' quarters alike, survival required an almost artistic refusal to waste materials. The sleeping arrangements are rarely restful in the way you might imagine rest. Bedding may consist of straw pallets, rough blankets, ticking stuffed with whatever can be gathered, or shared bedsteads when available. Vermin are an ordinary problem. Fleas do not respect exhaustion. Lice are democratic in the worst possible way. The night can feel long even when the body is desperate to surrender. A hard day in the field or yard does not guarantee easy sleep when damp, cold, crowding, and pain have followed you indoors. Children shape the room as much as adults do. They crawl, lean, watch, ask, fidget, nap, and spill. They turn a spoon into a toy, a stick into a horse, a scrap of cloth into a companion. Their presence can soften a space and sharpen its danger at the same time. Every corner becomes a place to protect. Every cough becomes more worrying. Every shortage feels heavier when divided among smaller bodies. Black women often carry the hidden burden of making these domestic spaces function under impossible conditions. They patch clothing, monitor food, tend sickness, clean, soothe, ration, improvise storage, and manage small household rhythms that keep disorder from swallowing the room. None of this makes the home easy. It makes it livable. The line between those two things is wider than a planter would ever admit. There is also the question of who gets to live with whom. On some properties, family members may share a cabin. On others, arrangements are made according to labour needs rather than affection. A spouse may live on another holding. Children may sleep with adults not because it is ideal, but because there is nowhere else. Domestic space is shaped by authority from outside as much as by choice within. The room is never only yours. It belongs partly to the system that placed you there. Historians still debate the exact degree to which African architectural traditions influenced early black housing in the English colonies, especially under such constrained conditions. In some regions and periods, there may have been meaningful continuities in layout, yard use, or domestic organisation. In others, the pressure of colonial materials and supervision likely limited such expression sharply. The evidence is uneven, but even when walls are imposed, people still carry habits of space inside them. How to gather, where to cook, how to sit, how to place the sleeping child nearest the warmest point. Outside the cabin, the yard often matters almost as much as the room itself. It is where food is prepared, tools cleaned, garments aired, children watched, water carried, and bits of conversation exchanged. The evening yard can feel almost social for a few precious moments. Smoke rises straight in calm weather. Someone rinses a pot. Someone shells beans. Someone rocks gently with a baby. Someone stands with hands on aching hips and says very little, because the day has already used most words. The yard is not freedom, but it can be a small breathing space. Weather changes everything. In summer, heat collects indoors until the room feels stale and airless. In winter, cold creeps up from the floor and through the walls. During storms, rain drums on roof and leaks through weaknesses. Mud collects at the threshold. Blankets grow clammy. The effort required just to stay reasonably dry would impress any modern person and bore any colonial official, which is a neat summary of how suffering gets ignored. Storage is a constant puzzle. Where do you keep food safe from spoilage, theft, rats, or hungry children? Where do you put tools so they are near but not dangerous? Where does precious cloth stay clean? Where can a private object be hidden from curious eyes or hostile hands? A corner, a hook, a chest, a pot with a lid, a patch beneath bedding. Home in this world is partly the art of deciding where things can survive until morning. There are nights when conversation deepens. Stories are told softly. A memory from Africa may emerge in fragments, altered by time, language, and the caution required in bondage. A local tale may be added, carrying humour or warning, advice about herbs, childbirth, fishing, weather signs, or difficult masters may be passed quietly from one person to another. The cabin becomes a place of transmission, not formal education perhaps, but knowledge all the same, knowledge with warmth in it. And yet fear is rarely absent for long. A knock at the door after dark can tighten every muscle. Raised voices from the main house may signal trouble. A child's fever can turn the room into a chamber of helpless waiting. A missing person may leave behind a silence heavier than any furniture. Home shelters, but only partially. The outside world is always capable of stepping in without invitation. What strikes you most is that domestic life here is not secondary to history. It is history. These rough cabins, crowded rooms, smoky yards, and patched blankets are where a people under pressure hold on to personhood, not abstractly, not ceremonially, in bowls washed and reused, in sleeping children covered more carefully than the adults cover themselves, in herbs tied up to dry, in one pair of hands braiding another's hair by firelight, in a joke offered at exactly the right moment to keep the room from sinking. By late evening, the cabin settles into layers of breath and shadow. The fire burns lower. Small sounds become large, a shifting elbow, a whispered word, the creak of timber cooling. The smoke smell softens. Outside, insects pulse in the dark. Someone turns over carefully so as not to wake the others. Someone stays awake a little longer, staring upward, listening to wind worry the roof. This place is poor. It is exposed. It is too small. It is never fully secure. But within it, people still arrange life with astonishing care. They make order from scraps, warmth from embers, and belonging from proximity. The colony has provided shelter of the meanest sort, the rest, the feeling that a room can hold memory, tenderness, and the stubborn outline of a self, is created by the people inside it. Morning hunger is different from evening hunger. In the evening, at least there is the faint comfort of darkness and the hope of sleep. Morning hunger arrives with work already waiting. You feel it before you fully open your eyes, a hollow pull just under the ribs, not always sharp but steady. In 1670, for many black people in the English colonies, food is rarely about pleasure first. It is fuel, ration, memory, and negotiation. Clothing is much the same. It covers the body, protects it poorly, marks status, and wears out faster than anyone with power seems to care. You begin near a cooking place where embers still glow beneath last night's ash. Someone stirs them awake with a stick. The fire answers with a cough of sparks and a ribbon of smoke. A pot is set on, water added, meal poured in slowly, hand steady from repetition. Corn is everywhere in colonial life. It can be ground, boiled, baked, stretched, sweetened a little when fortune allows, or eaten plain when fortune does not. The smell of mush thickening in a pot is mild, earthy, and familiar. No one speaks of it as a feast. It is what gets you through the first hours. Food in the English colonies depends heavily on region, season, and what the people above you decide to provide or withhold. In the Chesapeake, corn becomes central, often paired with small amounts of pork, fish, beans, peas, or greens. In some places there is broth, in some places salted meat, too often more salt than meat. In leaner moments there may be almost nothing beyond grain and whatever can be found, grown, trapped, or quietly saved. Colonial diets for labouring people are built on repetition. That repetition keeps bodies moving, though not always well nourished. A mainstream fact of early colonial life is that enslaved and unfree labourers were often fed cheaply, with planters aiming to provide enough calories to sustain labour while spending as little as possible. This is where economics becomes intimate in the most unpleasant way. A budget decision appears later as dizziness in a field, weakness during illness, slow growth in a child, or desperate attention paid to crumbs left in a bowl. Money saved at the top shows up as hunger at the bottom. The kitchen air is busy with smells layered over smoke. Cornmeal, onion, greens wilted down in a pot, maybe fish if the day before was lucky, maybe pork if a ration has recently come through, sometimes pumpkin, beans, or peas soften in simmering water and make a room smell almost generous. The scent matters because it raises hope even when the meal itself is small. A rich smell can briefly fool the stomach into optimism. Colonial life becomes very good at those little deceits. You notice how carefully food is handled. Nothing useful is wasted. Fat is saved. Bones are boiled again. Greens are stripped fully from the stem. A stale heel of bread is softened in liquid. Scraps become soup, and soup becomes another meal stretched thinner. People learn the exact point at which a pot can still be scraped for enough to matter. This is a domestic science born under pressure, and it demands attention equal to any gentleman's talk of trade. Women often manage this effort with remarkable precision. A cook must know what can be stretched, what will spoil, what may be hidden for later, and what can be bartered quietly. She must feed children whose hunger is immediate, adults whose labour is brutal, and sometimes the planter's household first, leaving less than dignity would require for everyone else. She may season a pot with herbs, onions, or a bit of grease not simply for flavour, but to make poor ingredients feel more sustaining. Taste becomes a form of mercy. A touch of food matters too. A wooden spoon worn smooth by years of use. The gritty feel of ground meal. Tough meat that asks too much of tired teeth. A hot bowl warming cold fingers on a winter morning. A crust so hard it must be softened before a child can manage it. Hands become expert at judging enough and not enough by weight alone. A person can tell whether a ration is mean before even sitting down. Some ingredients come from the wider Atlantic world, though they arrive unequally. Molasses, for instance, appears in some colonial settings and can transform plain food with a dark sweetness that lingers on the tongue. Salted fish may travel long distances before meeting the pot. Imported goods move through docks and storehouses while the people unloading them may have almost no access to the better portions. Empire is strange that way. It can fill warehouses and still leave the labourer underfed. There is also food outside official rationing. That matters a great deal. Fishing, trapping, gathering, gardening, and small exchanges can make the difference between bare survival and something closer to steadiness. A handful of greens, a few beans, a fish pulled from a creek, berries gathered in season, a bird trapped quietly, a squash raised near a cabin. These additions are often humble, but they carry enormous weight. Hunger is rarely defeated outright. It is managed in clever little victories. One quirky detail of colonial foodways is how often people relied on one-pot meals not simply from preference, but from necessity of fuel, vessels, and time. A single pot could boil grain, soften beans, cook meat, and absorb every useful scrap. It was practical, economical, and mercilessly repetitive. Yet the same pot could also become a place where different food traditions met, with African knowledge, native crops, and European habits all colliding in the steam. History often smells like something simmering. Historians still debate exactly how much continuity African culinary traditions retained in the English colonies this early, especially given uneven records and the pressure of local ingredients. Some food practices likely survive strongly in technique rather than exact recipe. Mortar pounding, seasoning methods, greens cookery, rice knowledge in some regions later on, and preferences for certain textures may all reflect cultural persistence. The challenge is that written records were usually made by people who noticed the labour more than the meaning behind it. Still, the kitchen often preserves memory when law tries to erase it. Children experience food with special intensity. Their growth sharpens the cruelty of scarcity. A child watching a pot does not understand trade networks or plantation budgets. A child understands waiting, smell, and whether the bowl feels light in the hand. Many adults, in turn, measure their own hunger against that of the young. An older sibling eats slower. A mother says she's not hungry when she plainly is. These quiet transfers of nourishment do not appear in the ledger. They still shape who survives. Now the clothing. You feel it before you study it. Rough linen scratches the neck. Wool, when used, can itch and hold damp for hours. Coarse cloth rubs at seams and under the arm. Garments are patched, repatched, turned, and altered until their original shape hardly matters. The colonial world produces elegant fabric for some people, and mean cloth for others. Black labourers are expected to work in materials chosen for cheapness, not comfort. Their clothes must last through weather, mud, sweat, ash, and endless friction. They rarely do. A basic set of garments may include a shirt or shift, petticoat or breeches, a waistcoat if available, stockings when fortune allows, a cap, neckcloth, apron, or shoes in varying states of repair. Many have less. Children may wear simplified versions or hand-me-downs altered badly to fit. Clothing can hang loose, pull tight, or sit crooked on the body. Fit is a privilege. Utility is the official standard. Even that standard is often unmet. Shoes deserve their own complaint. When available, they can protect against thorns, cold, and rough ground, but they also pinch, rub, crack, and admit water with insulting ease. Bare feet toughen, but they invite cuts, splinters, parasites, and winter pain. A person may alternate between both states depending on season, task, and supply. Either way, the ground remains demanding. Mud sucks, stubble pricks, frost burns. Colonial soil is very direct in its opinions. The mending of clothes is constant. Needles move in poor light. Thread is precious. A shirt cuff phrase then is reinforced. A tear at the knee becomes a patch. A patch wears thin and receives another patch. Sleeves are shortened for a child, then let out for another. Cloth is cut down and reused until there is scarcely enough left for rags. These tasks require patience after long labour, which is perhaps why they reveal so much about endurance. To mend at night is to refuse the colony's hope that things will simply fall apart. There is sensory life in cloth as well. The smell of smoke trapped in wool, the clammy chill of damp linen at dawn, the dry warmth of fabric held near a fire without scorching, the sting of salt from dried sweat against rubbed skin, the little pleasure of a garment newly washed, however rough it still feels. Cleanliness in such circumstances is difficult and therefore meaningful. Washing is laborious. Drying takes time. Soap is limited. Yet people keep trying. Not vanity, dignity. Laundry itself is a punishing routine. Water carried, kettles heated, cloth beaten, scrubbed, rinsed, wrung, and hung. Hands crack in winter, shoulders ache from lifting. Steam rises from tubs and smells faintly of lye. The work can consume hours. Yet it is easy for those with power to treat clean garments as if they simply appear. That is the magic trick of hierarchy. The hardest labour often becomes the least visible. There are moments when clothing carries more than function. A head wrap tied with care, a bead preserved, a particular colour remembered or preferred, a fabric scrap saved because its pattern pleases the eye. Dress can hold personality even under harsh constraint. That matters because systems of bondage prefer sameness. They like people reduced to categories and tasks. A small choice in appearance, however limited, presses back against that flattening. Planters and mistresses sometimes issue garments at fixed times or according to labour needs, especially when they want to maintain a workable labour force at low cost. Yet distribution can be uneven, delayed, or insulting in quality. A promise shirt arrives late. Shoes are too small. Cloth is rotten at the fold. Children outgrow what little they have before replacements come. In cold weather, want becomes especially bitter. The body cannot argue with winter through principle alone. There is uncertainty among historians about the exact consistency of ration and clothing distribution from one property to another in this period, especially where surviving account books are sparse. Some owners likely provided more regular allocations out of self-interest. Others neglected such provisioning until labour suffered visibly. The range matters, but not in a comforting way. Even the better end of the spectrum was usually shaped by profit first. Benevolence is not the right word for a system calculating how little it can spend on your skin and stomach. As evening comes, you can hear the smaller domestic sounds that surround food and cloth. A ladle scraping a pot almost clean. Scissors snipping thread. A child asking for more. Someone shaking out a damp shirt before hanging it near the fire. The smell of soup, smoke, and wet fabric mingles until it becomes the scent of the whole room. Tired hands keep moving, button, hem, Stir, fold, tie, scrape, rinse. What strikes you most is how necessity becomes a field of skill. Black people in the colonies are forced to survive on too little, yet out of that pressure they develop methods of stretching food, preserving scraps, repurposing cloth, seasoning bland meals, and making the smallest household stores last longer than anyone should expect. This is not some charming lesson in thrift. It is a record of people denied enough and still finding ways to live. By the time night settles fully, the bowl is empty, the spoon set aside, the garment patched as well as dim light allowed. The stomach is quieter, though not satisfied. The body is covered, though not comfortably. Still, there is a kind of victory in that. A meal happened. Cloth held together one more day. A child was fed first. A tear was closed. In a world built on taking, even these small preservations of life carry their own quiet force. Night changes the colony. In daylight, power looks busy and practical, all tools, ledgers, and commands. After dark, another world rises beside it, quieter and harder to measure. You hear it in the hush after the last yard noise fades, in the low cadence of a prayer spoken near a bed of straw, in a hum that hovers beneath words, in the scrape of a stool moved closer to the fire while someone begins to tell what cannot be written safely on paper. Faith lives here, but not in the tidy way colonial authorities prefer. It moves through memory, gesture, warning, comfort, and stubborn inner life. You step into an evening room where the air is warm with smoke and human breath. The hearth has burned down to a deep orange bed of embers. Shadows gather in the corners and make the room feel larger than it is. Someone wraps a cloth tighter around their shoulders. A child, nearly asleep, leans against an adult's side and traces circles in the dust with one finger. Outside, frogs call from wet ground, and the wind taps a loose board with patient fingers. Inside, the mood shifts. Work is done for now. The spirit, however burdened, begins its own labour. Colonial Christianity is everywhere in official language. Planters talk about providence, ministers speak of sin, magistrates invoke duty, and church bells ring over roads, fields, and riverbanks as if moral order were already secure. Yet black people in 1670 encounter that Christianity under conditions warped by power. They may hear sermons about obedience from men who ignore mercy. They may be urged toward baptism by owners who have no intention of treating them as spiritual equals in daily life. The result is not simple acceptance or simple rejection. It is something more layered, more cautious, and often more creative. A mainstream fact of the period is that many English colonists promoted Christian conversion among black people, while simultaneously protecting slavery from any implication of equality. That contradiction matters deeply. It means faith arrives in a setting already crowded with hypocrisy. The message says all souls matter before God, while the social order says some bodies matter less before everyone else. You do not need a theology degree to sense the conflict. You only need ears and ordinary honesty. Still, people pray. Of course they do. Prayer does not belong only to the powerful, and it does not disappear because institutions are corrupt. In fact, prayer often grows sharper in unjust places. You hear whispered appeals for health, for protection, for a child's fever to break, for a husband travelling at night to return safely, for a woman in labour, for strength to face another day without surrendering the self entirely. These prayers may be in English, in African languages, or in mixtures shaped by memory and survival. Some are formal, some are hardly more than breath-shaped into hope. The room carries faith through the senses. You smell herbs drying from a beam, maybe rosemary, maybe something gathered for healing and kept near at hand. Smoke lingers in cloth and hair. A hand rests gently on a forehead during prayer, warm and steady. Someone rocks in place while humming, not dramatically. just enough to soothe a frightened child or a troubled mind. The sound is low, repetitive, almost like a heartbeat turned into melody. Religion here is not only spoken belief, it is rhythm, touch, and atmosphere. African spiritual memory does not vanish upon arrival in the colonies, even under immense violence and separation. People carry fragments of cosmology, ritual habits, protective practices, reverence for ancestors, ideas about sacred power, and ways of reading illness or fortune. Not every person carries the same tradition, of course. West and Central Africa are vast, and the people forced across the Atlantic come from many societies. Yet common threads survive in the body, in gesture, in healing knowledge, in the treatment of the dead, in music, and in the instinct to preserve meaning privately when public expression is dangerous. One of the quirkiest and most revealing details in colonial records is how often Europeans dismiss unfamiliar sacred practices as nonsense because they do not understand them. A charm tied discreetly into clothing, a protective bundle hidden in a room, a certain herb placed with intention, a phrase repeated over water. All of this might be recorded by an outsider as foolish superstition, if recorded at all. That tells you more about the observer than the practice. Colonial people were often excellent at noticing difference and terrible at interpreting it. Faith also appears in healing. A woman may know which leaves ease swelling, which root helps settle a stomach, which steam opens the chest, which bitter brew reduces fever, and which touch calms a panicked child. Some of this knowledge comes from African traditions, some from European exchange, some from native knowledge, and some from hard experience in a land where formal medicine is frequently crude and unreliable. Healing and spirituality are not neatly separated in such a world. The body and soul are treated together because necessity refuses tidy categories. You may be tempted to imagine religion only in moments of grand feeling, but much of it lives in routine. A quiet blessing over a bowl before eating, a repeated phrase at bedtime, a hand sign made without ceremony, a name spoken softly to keep memory alive, a warning to children not to mock certain things, a custom around childbirth or burial, followed because it feels right and because rightness matters when the larger world is so wrong. These small acts form a hidden architecture of belief. Children absorb this world with unusual sensitivity. They may sit half asleep through whispered stories that carry moral lessons and old fears together. They learn which objects are ordinary and which are handled with care. They notice when adults lower their voices. They remember songs long before they understand all the words. A child raised in bondage may encounter Christianity through the colony's demands, but also encounter older sacred meanings through household life, through lullabies, through gestures repeated too often to be accidental. There is music here as well, though not always in the form later generations would recognize immediately. A hum over work, a call softened into near speech, a pulse tapped on a knee, bench, or pot rim. Repetition comforts the nervous system. Melody creates a little interior space no overseer can fully enter. Sound is a shelter of sorts. It can carry grief without naming it too plainly. It can make fear breathe more slowly. It can also preserve memory where writing is denied. Historians still argue about how much direct continuity can be traced between specific African religious practices and the spiritual lives of black people in the English colonies this early. The evidence is partial, filtered through hostile witnesses, and often frustratingly vague. Some scholars emphasize rupture, noting how violence, forced migration, and mixing of different ethnic groups disrupted older traditions. Others point to strong survivals in healing, burial customs, spirit beliefs, music, and ritual forms. Both views contain truth. Continuity here is rarely perfect preservation. More often it is adaptation under pressure, memory shaped into new forms without losing its core force. Burial practices reveal much about that force. Death is common in the 17th century, far too common, and burial is one of the moments when belief presses visibly against the conditions of bondage. Even where formal choices are limited, people may try to mark a grave, speak a proper word, place the body carefully, or keep certain customs alive in secret. The dead are not always left entirely to the planter's logic. Memory tries to intervene. Grief asks for ritual, even when the world provides almost none. The official church, meanwhile, can be both presence and absence. Some black people may attend services, stand at the edge of them, or hear them from a distance. They learn biblical stories, moral language, and liturgical rhythms. They may find real comfort there. They may also hear messages twisted towards submission. The same scripture that speaks of deliverance can be preached by men determined to protect hierarchy. This creates a complicated spiritual landscape. Black hearers are not simply passive recipients. They listen selectively, interpret deeply, and carry away what nourishes while recognizing what is weaponized. There are nights when one person in a room seems to become the center of calm, not because they hold formal authority, but because they know how to settle frightened hearts. Perhaps it is an older woman with a healing reputation, perhaps a man with a measured voice and a gift for prayer, perhaps someone who remembers more of the old words than others do. People lean towards such figures, not dramatically, just enough to show trust, in a world designed to make life feel unstable. Spiritual steadiness becomes a precious social role. You can hear scholarly uncertainty in another question too. To what extent did enslaved and unfree black people build collective religious practices across different African backgrounds in this early period? Before, later, more visible forms of black Christianity emerged. The answer is difficult. Some gatherings were likely small, fluid, and domestic rather than formal. Shared need may have produced common practices even where original traditions differed, but the record rarely gives those moments the dignity of detail. What survives most clearly is not a complete liturgy, but evidence of spiritual improvisation. Improvisation, though, should not be mistaken for weakness. It can be a source of power. A faith assembled from fragments may become intensely resilient because each fragment has been chosen, remembered, and protected. A whispered prayer that crosses languages is not diluted. It is concentrated. A song that survives without written notation is not lesser. It is alive in the body. A healing custom that moves from grandmother to child through repetition carries more than practical knowledge. It carries belonging. Even the natural world becomes part of spiritual atmosphere. Moonlight through a crack in the wall. Rain tapping the roof in a pattern that invites listening. The smell of wet earth after a storm. The call of night insects rising and falling like breath in such conditions. People often read weather, animals, and sudden silences with heightened attention. The colony is dangerous because the senses stay alert. That alertness can easily merge with spiritual intuition, a warning feeling, a dream taken seriously, a sign not dismissed. Some faith is private because privacy is the only safe form available. A person may keep one line of prayer entirely to themselves. Another may preserve a name from home and repeat it inwardly at moments of fear. Another may fold sacred meaning into an everyday act so completely that observers see only routine. This hiddenness is not evidence of weak belief. Often it is evidence of careful belief, belief clever enough to survive scrutiny. As the night deepens, you notice how spiritual life softens the edges of exhaustion without erasing them. A woman still aches after work, a child still coughs, a man still dreads the next day. Yet the room feels subtly altered by prayer, song, and shared quiet. People sit a little straighter. Breathing slows. The heart, which has been braced against the colony all day, loosens for a few moments. That is not a small thing. In places of domination, inner steadiness can become a form of resistance. What emerges most clearly is that faith for black people in 1670 is not merely an imported doctrine and not merely an old memory carried intact. It is a living blend shaped by coercion, longing, intelligence, and need. Christianity enters through the colony's institutions. African sacred memory enters through people themselves. Daily suffering forces the two into contact. Out of that contact come prayers, songs, healing practices, private rituals, and moral understandings that belong fully to neither master nor missionary. The embers settle lower, a final prayer is murmured. Someone adjusts a sleeping child beneath a blanket. Outside, the dark fields breathe under moonlight, silent for now. Inside, the room grows still, but not empty. Faith remains there in the air, in the herbs, in the low hum fading into sleep, in the sense that the soul has not surrendered simply because the body is constrained. The colony can command labour, punish movement, and ration food. It cannot fully occupy the inward place where meaning is made. Love survives in hard places, though it has to travel carefully. In 1670, black family life in the English colonies is built under strain so constant that tenderness itself can feel like an act of courage. You see it not in grand declarations, but in the ordinary gestures that keep human ties alive. A woman straightens a child's collar before dawn. A man saves the softer part of a meal for someone else. Two people trade a glance across a yard that says more than speech safely can. Kinship here is made from attention, from memory, from promises spoken low enough that power cannot quite seize them. You enter a yard in the late evening where the work has finely thinned to small emotions. A pot has been scraped nearly clean, a baby fusses, then settles against a shoulder. The smell of smoke, damp earth, and boiled greens hangs in the cooling air. Nearby, two children lean against one another with the heavy, careless trust of the exhausted. An older woman watches them while sorting cloth by the firelight. Nothing in this scene looks dramatic. That is exactly why it matters. Family life often hides in plain sight, doing its most important work quietly. The colony, of course, does not respect these bonds in any reliable way. A marriage may be emotionally real and socially recognised within a black community, while carrying little formal legal weight in the eyes of owners or courts. A parent can love a child fiercely and still have almost no power to prevent separation. A brother can promise to protect a sister and still be sent elsewhere by debt, sale, or command. The emotional world is rich. The legal world is cold. People must live inside both at once. A mainstream fact of slavery's rise is that enslaved families were often denied secure legal recognition, leaving spouses, parents, and children deeply vulnerable to separation. In 1670, this vulnerability is already becoming central to black life in the colonies. The household is never only a place of affection. It is also a place haunted by uncertainty. Every bond carries joy and risk together, as if love must always glance over its shoulder. Children are at the heart of that tension. They transform a room by their presence. They bring noise, need, play, questions, and a reason to keep going when the day has been unkind. They also sharpen every fear. A cough in the night becomes unbearable. A fever can make the whole cabin feel smaller. A child growing thin from poor food is not an abstract injustice. It is visible in the wrist, the cheek, the slowness at dusk. Parents notice all of it, even when they cannot change enough of it. You can hear family in the sounds of the evening. A soft warning not to step too near the hearth. A lullaby almost whispered. Siblings quarrelling over a crust, then sharing it badly but sincerely. An adult voice telling a child to hush when footsteps pass outside. A little burst of laughter when someone mispronounces a word or copies a pompous master too well. Humour travels through kinship because it eases fear without denying it. Families in bondage do not become solemn monuments. They remain lively, irritated, affectionate, and tired. Parenting under such conditions requires emotional skill that colonial records rarely honour. A mother must comfort without always being able to promise safety. A father must teach caution without teaching complete surrender. Adults must decide what children should know, what they should not yet know, and what cannot be hidden at all. They teach practical things early: when to stay quiet, whom not to trust, how to carry water without spilling, how to watch moods, how to remember names. Childhood here contains tenderness, but it is not sheltered. The touch of family is everywhere: a palm against a hot forehead, fingers working gently through a child's hair, a sleeping infant's weight on the chest, a hand squeezed briefly under a table, a blanket pulled higher over small shoulders. Touch has to do what law will not do. It reassures, it claims. It says you belong to someone in a human sense, not a property sense. In a world determined to define people through ownership, affectionate touch quietly asserts a different order. Romantic love exists too, though it must make room for caution. Courtship may happen across work routines, shared tasks, church gatherings, river landings, or evening visits allowed or merely tolerated. A conversation while carrying wood, a gift of fruit or cloth. A joke repeated because both remember it. A look held for a beat too long. These are small beginnings, but they matter. The colony would like black adults to be only labouring bodies. Desire, devotion, and preference complicate that neat reduction. Some unions are encouraged by owners when they promise stability or children. Others are ignored unless they cause inconvenience. Some couples live together. Others must maintain relationships across properties, meeting only when permission, distance, and luck align. Imagine the strain of loving someone whose time is not their own. Every visit becomes uncertain. Every parting carries the possibility of being permanent. Even so, people commit, hope, quarrel, reconcile, and plan. Human attachment does not politely wait for better legal conditions. A quirky but revealing detail is how often names become vessels for family continuity. In unstable conditions, the naming of a child can hold memory, aspiration, and grief all at once. A child may carry the name of a parent, grandparent, lost sibling, respected elder, or someone left across the Atlantic. To outsiders, it may look like ordinary naming. Inside the family, it can be an act of preservation. A name can keep someone present in the room who is otherwise gone. Fictive kin also matters deeply. Not every meaningful family tie is biological. An older woman may become auntie to children not born from her body. A man may stand as protective elder to younger people, with no direct blood relation, shared language, origin, work, age, affection, and need can all create family-like bonds. In conditions where legal structures fail or threaten you, community often expands the meaning of kin. This is not a sentimental extra. It is survival architecture. Historians still debate the exact extent to which African kinship patterns remained intact in the early English colonies, given the disruptions of forced migration, sale, and ethnic mixing. Some emphasize rupture, noting that slavers and owners fractured lineages and communities with devastating regularity. Others point to enduring habits of extended kin care, age respect, naming, ritual responsibility, and the creation of wider networks of belonging. The evidence suggests both damage and resilience. Family did not remain untouched. It also did not disappear. There are evenings when a parent tells a story partly to entertain and partly to instruct. The story may feature a clever animal, a foolish man, a spirit, a trickster, or a journey with hidden warning inside it. Children listen for the plot. Adults listen for the lesson. Such storytelling can carry memory from Africa, pick up new local meanings, and help children understand the moral weather of the colony without blunt speeches. Stories are useful that way. They can teach caution, cleverness, and endurance while sounding like simple bedtime talk. Loss presses close to all of this. Some families are reduced by illness before they can even settle into routine. The 17th century is crowded with death from fever, flux, childbirth, infection, and the general violence of poor living conditions, a parent may bury a child may lose a parent too early to remember their voice properly. Siblings may be separated not by sale, but by mortality. Grief becomes part of domestic life, sitting quietly beside the fire as if it has always belonged there. The fear of sale or forced transfer adds another layer. Even where sale is not an everyday event on a given property, the possibility shapes behaviour. People may hesitate to plan too far ahead. They may store memory and stories because paper cannot be trusted. They may teach children to remember relatives by face, scar, song, or habit, just in case names must be carried without the person. Hope itself becomes cautious. That caution is not weakness. It is wisdom earned too early. You can sense love in labour as well. A parent taking the heavier task so a child avoids it for another year. An older sister mending a younger one's garment by firelight. A man using one tired evening to repair a stool because an elder's joints ache. A woman saving herbs for someone else's cough instead of her own. Family is not only a feeling here, it is work redistributed according to care. It is time given away despite scarcity. The colony often refuses to see black families except as labour units or future property lines. That blindness is deliberate. To fully acknowledge black domestic life would require recognising interiority, affection, and moral claims that slavery cannot accommodate without exposing itself. So official records flatten people into categories: male, female, child, Negro, servant, slave, valuable, sickly, increase. Those cold words pass over lives full of jokes, tempers, loyalties, rivalries, and devotion. The archive thins what the evening room thickens. Another scholarly uncertainty lies in how common stable two-parent households were in different colonial regions and labour regimes during this early period. The evidence varies widely. Some places likely allowed more sustained co-residence, while others fractured households more severely. Disease, labour demands, and local custom all change the picture. But focusing too narrowly on household form can miss a larger truth. Even where stable residence was fragile, people still made family through care, recognition, and repeated commitment. The structure might be battered. The bond could remain strong. Children also learn from watching adults love each other under pressure. They see shared glances. They hear murmured disagreements patched up before sleep. They notice who sits beside whom after a bad day. They understand, often better than adults realise, who will come if they cry out in the night. That knowledge creates security even when the larger world offers none. To know who belongs to you and whom you belong with is powerful, especially when everything else feels contingent. There are also tensions inside family life. Naturally, exhaustion breeds impatience. Hunger sharpens tempers. Crowded rooms allow little privacy. A child may cry at the wrong moment. A couple may argue over risk, loyalty, or some scarce item used too soon. An elder may resent being ignored. These frictions do not cancel affection. They prove it lives in real conditions, not in polished portraits. Love under strain can still be messy, and perhaps especially noble for continuing anyway. As the night deepens, someone begins braiding a girl's hair by the fire. The fingers move with practiced rhythm. The child complains, then relaxes. Across the room, a man carves or smooths some small object with a knife, more by touch than sight. A baby has fallen fully asleep. The smell of warm ash settles lower. Outside, the dark feels wide and uncertain. Inside, the room feels briefly held together by the simple fact that people are attending to one another. That is what family means here. Not safety guaranteed by law, not inheritance protected by courts, not a house secure from intrusion. It means people choosing one another repeatedly inside conditions designed to tear them apart. It means teaching names, sharing food, keeping watch, telling stories, grieving losses, and making room for affection even when fear occupies half the doorway. The colony cannot stop black people from loving. It can only make love costly, and still they love. They raise children with care they were never properly given. They create kin where blood alone is not enough. They hold marriages in memory and practice, even when law refuses to bless them. They keep names alive. They pass songs into small ears. They teach one another how to endure without becoming hollow. In that sense, family becomes one of the deepest refusals in colonial life, a refusal to be reduced, a refusal to forget, a refusal to let the heart belong entirely to the system that exploits the body. Power in the colonies likes to call itself discipline. It sounds cleaner that way, more reasonable, less like fear with a whip in its hand. In 1670, punishment surrounds black life not only in the moment it falls, but in the warning it leaves behind. You feel it in the pauses before a person answers, in the habit of watching a master's face before speaking, in the way bodies move with care around tools, doors, roads, and thresholds. Violence is never far away, yet neither is defiance. It simply learns to change its shape. You stand in a yard at midday where the sun presses down hard enough to flatten every colour into glare. The smell is hot wood, trampled dirt, sweat, and the faint bitterness of tobacco leaves drying nearby. A dog pants in the shade. A bucket tips somewhere with a dull knock. Nobody is talking much. The silence has texture. It is not peace. It is the kind of hush that appears when everyone is listening for trouble before trouble fully arrives. Punishment in this world can be public or private, formal or sudden. A master may strike in anger. An overseer may threaten before acting, using suspense as part of the control. A court may order whipping, confinement, extra labour, or extended service. Restraints, blows, humiliation, food deprivation, and forced exposure to heat or cold can all be part of the colony's repertoire. Pain is used not only to injure, but to teach a lesson to everyone watching. That is crucial. Punishment here is theatre as much as correction. A mainstream fact of early slavery is that physical coercion was central to maintaining labour and hierarchy. This was not an occasional breakdown of order. It was part of the order itself. A system built on forcing people to work, stay, obey, and reproduce for someone else cannot function by persuasion alone. It requires the constant possibility of violence. Even when the whip is not raised, its memory remains in the air. The body learns this quickly. Muscles tighten at certain tones of voice. The shoulders brace when footsteps approach too fast. The stomach drops when your name is called in full. A child can read danger in adult stillness before fully understanding why. You see how punishment travels through the nerves of a community. One person's suffering becomes everyone's warning. That shared knowledge changes posture, conversation, even breathing. Fear is taught collectively, yet fear never works perfectly. That is the detail power hates most. People adapt around it. They create small margins of choice inside very narrow walls. A person may nod obediently, then work a little slower once no one is looking. Another may hide weariness behind apparent clumsiness. Another may quietly warn a friend that anger is building in the big house. Another may preserve strength by appearing more broken than they truly are. These acts are modest on the surface. They are still acts of self-defense. There is a sensory world to punishment too. The sharp smell of leather, the sting of sweat in a cut, the gritty scrape of dirt against knees, the way hot air feels even hotter when shame and fear are added to it, the little gasp a person makes when they are trying very hard not to cry out. The silence after a beating can be almost louder than the event itself. It settles over a yard like ash. Owners and overseers often justify violence with language about laziness, insolence, theft, idleness, or disorder. Those words are useful because they can mean almost anything. Too slow, too tired, too bold, too frightened, too visible, too human in the wrong direction. Colonial authority likes vague charges because vague charges widen its reach. If the offence is undefined enough, punishment can always find a pretext. The system becomes elegantly unfair, Some punishments aim at the body, others aim at time, extra labour, reduced rest, separation from family, denial of movement, or restriction of food can all function as discipline. For people already living close to the edge of exhaustion, even a small increase in burden can feel enormous. To lose an evening visit, a chance to tend a small plot, or a little sleep is no trivial matter. Time is one of the few things the enslaved are allowed only in scraps. Taking even more of it is a serious wound. Women face punishments shaped by gender as well as status. They may be beaten, threatened, overworked, humiliated, or targeted through their children. Their domestic labour can make them visible in one set of ways and vulnerable in another. The colony is not inventive in any noble sense, but it is inventive in cruelty. It knows how to reach for the pressure point that hurts most. A mother may endure something herself more easily than a threat to her child. Power understands that. It uses that knowledge. Children grow up near punishment, which is its own kind of injury. They hear it, witness it, and learn early which mistakes are dangerous. Some are disciplined directly, especially as they age into more demanding labour. Others absorb fear through the adults around them. A child who sees a grown person humiliated learns that authority is not merely stern, it is unpredictable, and it expects submission from everyone. That lesson sinks deep. A revealing oddity in colonial records is how often official descriptions of punishment are brief to the point of absurdity. A line may note that someone was corrected, whipped, or confined, with no real sense of the terror involved. The archive can be strangely calm about violence, as if understatement were a form of innocence. It is not. It is simply the language of people who want cruelty to seem routine. A casual tone does not make a wound smaller. Historians still debate how punishment varied between smaller households and larger plantation settings in this early period. In a small household, surveillance might be intimate and constant, leaving little room to disappear. On a larger property, there may be more chances for covert resistance, but also more formalized discipline meant to manage groups. The surviving evidence is uneven. Some punishments went unrecorded, others were exaggerated for effect. What remains clear is that violence was adaptable. It changed form according to setting, but it remained foundational. Now to the other side of the story, the quieter one, the one that keeps the blood moving. Defiance appears first in the body's refusal to become pure instrument. A worker saves a little strength. A woman keeps a portion of food back for someone weaker. A man pretends not to hear an insulting order right away. Gaining 2 breaths of dignity, a child learns to keep a treasured object hidden from confiscation. None of this topples the system. That does not make it meaningless. Resistance is not only successful revolt, often it is the daily protection of the self. There is also verbal defiance, though it must wear disguises. A joke made at the master's expense once he's out of earshot. A story whose fool resembles someone powerful a little too closely. A polite answer that carries just enough dryness to satisfy the speaker without inviting immediate punishment. Black humour under bondage can be razor sharp, because it has to cut without always being seen cutting. People laugh softly, but the intelligence in that laughter is fierce. Some resistance is practical. Tools are misplaced. Tasks take longer than expected. Information travels among workers faster than owners realise. A person warned in time may hide, prepare, or simply avoid the worst of a situation. Feigned ignorance can be useful. So can exaggerated obedience that reveals nothing real. And colonists often mistake silence for simplicity. That mistake benefits the silenced. Escape exists in the imagination and sometimes in reality. Running away is one of the clearest refusals the system can provoke, though it is terribly dangerous. The landscape itself can be enemy or ally. Forests, marshes, rivers, and unfamiliar roads offer concealment and threat together. A runaway may seek kin, native communities, port towns, or simply distance. The colony fears flight because it exposes the lie that captivity is natural. If slavery were natural, why would so many people risk so much to leave it? Aid from others matters here. A hidden crust, a bit of cloth for a foot, a warning about patrols, directions given indirectly, silence kept when questions are asked. Resistance often depends on relationships more than heroics. One person alone is vulnerable. Two people sharing knowledge are harder to control. A network does not have to be formal to be powerful. It only has to hold. Spiritual practices can also become forms of defiance. A prayer said in your own terms. A song carrying sorrow without surrender. A healing custom preserved despite mockery. These things refuse the master's right to define the inner world. So does naming, storytelling, and the passing on of memory. The colony wants labour, obedience, and forgetfulness. Black life keeps producing labour, partial obedience, and memory. That last one matters enormously. Another form of resistance is aesthetic. A woman ties her headcloth with care despite the day's degradation. A man smooths a carved object at night because beauty, however small, reminds him he is still a maker, not merely a tool. Hair is tended. Children are taught manners. Clothes are patched neatly, not just roughly. Such acts may seem minor to outsiders. They are not. They insist that personhood will not be entirely flattened into utility. There are moments of open confrontation. Of course. A hand pulled away, a command refused, a blow returned. These moments are rare not because courage is rare, but because consequences are severe. When they happen, they ripple through everyone who hears of them. Some feel fear, some feel pride, most feel both. Open resistance reminds the community that domination is not absolute, even if it also invites terrible reprisal. Scholars still argue about how to measure resistance in periods where records are scarce and mostly written by the oppressors. If you count only rebellions, the archive may seem thin. If you count hidden survival strategies, work slowdowns, covert cultural preservation, family protection, and small acts of sabotage, then resistance is everywhere. The debate is really about visibility. The people in power noticed what threatened them directly. The people below noticed many more forms of refusal than the records admit. As evening settles, punishment and defiance remain braided together in the air. You hear a low voice comforting someone shaken by the day. You smell a healing salve warming near the hearth. You see a child watching adults closely, learning what to fear and what to imitate. Someone begins a story with a foolish fox or a trickster figure. Everyone understands more than the tale says aloud. Cleverness is being praised. Survival is being taught. What becomes unmistakable is this. The colony wants obedience, but it can never quite secure the inner consent that would make obedience complete. It can force motion, extract labour, and inflict pain. It cannot eliminate judgment. Black people in 1670 are constantly assessing, adapting, withholding, preserving, and sometimes striking back in whatever ways the moment allows. Their resistance is not always visible to the powerful, which is one reason it endures. Night comes cooler at last. The yard empties. The dog curls into itself. Somewhere beyond the cabins, frogs begin again in the wet grass. The day's punishments do not disappear with darkness, neither do the day's defiances. Both travel indoors, into memory, into posture, into the next choice a person will make when ordered, watched, or cornered. And in that continuing chain of choices, however constrained, you can still feel a stubborn pulse of freedom refusing to die. The colony is crowded with people who need one another and distrust one another at the same time. That is one of its defining moods. In 1670, black life is shaped not only by masters and laws, but by the constant friction of living among Europeans of different ranks, native communities with their own interests and dangers, sailors, traders, servants, widows, overseers, small farmers, and ambitious men trying to become important by stepping on anyone available. You move through a world of encounters, and almost none of them are simple. Morning on the riverfront begins with noise before full light. Water slaps against hulls, ropes creak, a gull shrieks with rude confidence. Men call to one another while carrying barrels that smell of tar, tobacco, fish, and damp wood. The mud at the landing grips your feet with every step, and the cold air off the water cuts through thin cloth before the sun climbs high enough to soften it. These places are full of contact. Goods move, news moves, people move. So do rumours, resentments, and opportunities. Black people in the colonies do not live apart from everyone else in neat historical categories. They are woven into everyday exchange. A black labourer may work beside a white indentured servant in the same field, unload cargo with a sailor from another port, trade a few words with a poor settler's wife at market, receive directions barked by an overseer, or pass close enough to a native traveller to notice clothing, language, and caution in the eyes. Each encounter carries status inside it. Each one asks the same unspoken question: who has power over whom and for how long? A mainstream fact of the 17th century is that black labourers and white indentured servants often lived and worked in close proximity, especially in the plantation colonies. That closeness matters because it reveals something colonial elites found dangerous. Poor Europeans and black people could recognise shared exploitation, at least in part. They both laboured hard. They both suffered punishment. They both could be ordered, watched, and underfed. The ruling class understood this resemblance and increasingly worked to sharpen racial difference so class similarity would matter less. You see the resemblance in the field first. A white servant sweats under the same sun. His shirt clings to his back. His hands are blistered and his face already old from weather, though he is not truly old. He curses softly when the overseer turns away. A black worker nearby hears him and says little. There may be sympathy, distrust, or both. The servant may count the years until his term ends, while the black labourer knows no such promise protects him. That difference sits between them like a third person. Some white servants feel the injustice clearly enough to resent the planter more than the black worker beside them. Others cling to racial pride because it is the only status available to them. Colonial society encourages this constantly. A poor white man may own almost nothing and still be invited to feel superior to a black person. That invitation is poison, but it is effective poison. It gives wounded people someone below them to police. The colony relies on that habit heavily. On the road, in tavern yards, and near storehouses, you can often sense this tension in conversation. A white labourer may joke with a black man one moment, then pull back when someone respectable appears. Familiarity can evaporate under scrutiny. A shared complaint about work may suddenly turn into a warning that each must know their place. Status in the colonies is slippery for some and brutally fixed for others. That instability breeds strange manners. Men who seem almost companionable in private may become cold performers of hierarchy in public. There are also Europeans above the servant class, but below the great planters, small farmers, hired men, widows managing property, craftsmen, petty traders, clerks, boatmen. Their relationships with black people vary widely. A tradesman may depend on black skill while refusing respect. A widow may bargain sharply over labour and rations because her household balance is fragile. A boatman may exchange useful gossip for help loading cargo. A clerk may reduce a life to 2 lines in an account book, then go home feeling civilised. Ordinary colonial society is full of these unequal exchanges. Markets create another kind of contact. You hear chickens protesting from baskets, smell onions and leather and stale ale, and feel the jostle of bodies passing too close. Here information can be as valuable as food. Who has died? Who is in debt? Which ship has arrived? Which master is angry? Which road is watched? A black person moving through such a place must read faces quickly. Curiosity can be dangerous. so can invisibility. To be noticed too much is risky. To be noticed too little may erase an opportunity. Sailors bring a different energy. They're often rough, hurried, and full of stories. Their clothing smells of salt, tar, bilge water, and sweat trapped in wool. Some have seen ports across the Atlantic. Some have worked on ships that carried enslaved Africans. Some know more of the world than local planters, but possess less standing. A sailor may treat a black dock worker with casual contempt, rough humour, or surprising practical respect depending on the moment, the cargo, and the company. Seaports breed a certain flexibility of manners without softening the hierarchy beneath them. A curious tidbit of colonial life is how multilingual some edges of this world could become. Near ports and trading zones, you might hear fragments of English, African languages, Dutch, bits of Spanish or Portuguese, native languages, and sailor slang all brushing against one another. Not everyone understands much, but people become skilled at reading gesture, tone, and key words, meaning travels in broken forms. So does caution. A warning can be delivered with half a phrase and a look. Native communities complicate the picture further. English colonists are not the only people shaping the land. Native nations have their own politics, trade relationships, rivalries, survival strategies, and experiences of violence at English hands. Black people may encounter native individuals through trade, labour, flight, shared geography, or conflict. Sometimes there are moments of aid, exchange, or mutual recognition. Sometimes there is suspicion. Sometimes native groups, under pressure from colonial systems, participate in slave trading or captive taking themselves. Frontier life does not sort neatly into moral simplicity. You travel along a wooded path where the smell shifts from river mud to pine, leaf mould, and the faint sweetness of crushed grass. Somewhere off the path, an axe rings against timber. Farther off, a bird calls, then another answers. In such spaces, encounters can be quiet and decisive. A black runaway may hope for refuge from native people and find either help or rejection. A native traveller may see a black labourer and recognise another person navigating English expansion, though not from the same position. Shared danger does not automatically produce alliance. It can, but history rarely grants that outcome cheaply. Historians still argue about the extent and character of black and native relationships in different English colonies during this period. The evidence is scattered and strongly shaped by colonial observers who often misunderstood what they saw. Some scholars emphasise moments of cooperation, intermarriage, or shared resistance in frontier zones. Others stress that competition, captive trading, and differing political interests often limited solidarity. Both patterns seem to have existed. That uncertainty matters because it reminds you not to flatten either group into a single role in the story. Religion and status also affect encounters with Europeans. A minister may preach to black listeners while standing firmly inside a hierarchy that benefits from their subordination. A magistrate may speak of Christian duty and then rule in favour of the owner. A mistress may insist on order in the household while depending completely on black women's labour to create the comfort she considers normal. Piety and exploitation are intimate companions in the colony. They travel together with almost embarrassing ease, yet black people are not merely reacting to others. They're also shaping these encounters actively. A skilled black carpenter may negotiate indirectly through usefulness. A woman known for healing may acquire influence that crosses racial lines in moments of sickness. A man who works at a landing may collect news more quickly than the planter inland. A market woman may know who is likely to trade fairly, who cheats, who talks too much, and who has a weakness for gossip. Knowledge becomes social power even when formal power is denied. Children learn these maps early. They know which white adults are harsh, which are careless, which are easier to distract, which native visitors are treated with tension by the household, which paths near the road are risky, and which voices signal danger before the words themselves are clear. social intelligence becomes almost physical, a quickening of the body when the wrong person approaches, a relaxation when a safer one appears. The colony educates children in hierarchy long before any book could. There are also moments of intimacy across boundaries, though they are never free of imbalance. A poor white woman may share practical advice with a black mother about fever or childbirth. A white servant and a black labourer may swap complaints while hauling the same load. A native hunter may exchange food or directions. A sailor may pass along news from another colony that changes someone's understanding of what is possible. These moments should not be romanticised. They happen inside unequal worlds. Still, they are real, and they can matter enormously. The law increasingly tries to organise all this complexity by hardening categories. That is partly why everyday encounters matter so much. Daily life keeps producing messy contact, shared spaces, mixed labour, and inconvenient familiarity. The law responds by insisting on cleaner lines, but a market does not always behave like a statute, and a dock does not care much for ideology while a barrel is slipping. People encounter one another in the midst of tasks, emergencies, and needs that disrupt tidy theories of order. Another scholarly uncertainty lies in how often interracial alliances among labouring people translated into sustained collective action before elites move decisively to divide them. Records show moments of closeness and moments of fracture, but measuring trust is difficult when most surviving documents were written by those who feared it. You can infer quite a lot from the energy spent on separating people. Rulers do not work so hard to prevent bonds they think impossible. As afternoon light turns thicker and more golden, the market thins, boats pull back into the current, and the roads begin to clear. A black worker heads home with a little more information than he had in the morning. A white servant carries resentment and maybe a secret envy. A native traveller disappears into the tree line before dusk. A planter counts barrels and assumes he understands the world because he can count profits. He does not. The colony is always more complicated than its rulers want it to be. What becomes clear is that black life in 1670 unfolds in constant negotiation with others, not only with masters, but with fellow workers, rivals, strangers, traders, sailors, preachers, and neighbouring peoples. Some encounters offer danger, some offer knowledge, some reveal common suffering without overcoming difference. Some produce brief cooperation that cannot last. Through all of it, black people must read the room, the road, the dock, and the silence between words with extraordinary care. By evening, the river smells cooler, less muddy, more metallic in the fading light. Oars knock softly against wood. The cries from the docks give way to low talk and the distant bark of a dog inland. You stand in that dimness and realise that colonial society is held together not by harmony, but by managed tension. Everyone is placed in relation to everyone else, and those relations are being revised all the time. Black people bear the harshest weight of that arrangement, yet they also become some of its keenest interpreters. They have to. Their lives depend on understanding what others want, fear, and hide, and so the day closes with no simple lesson, only a sharper picture. The colony is a crowded stage of unequal encounters. Race is hardening, status is being sorted, alliances flicker, fail, or survive in fragments. Through it all, black men, women, and children move with watchful intelligence among the many kinds of people who shape their days, learning where danger begins, where usefulness can buy a little space, and where human connection might still be found in a world designed to ration it. You stand in 1670 at a moment that does not yet call itself historic. No trumpet announces it. No one gathers at a shoreline or courthouse to say that a terrible structure is settling into place for generations. The world simply keeps moving. Boats unload, fields are hoed, children are born, laws are copied, meals are cooked, punishments are given, prayers are whispered, and inside those ordinary motions, something vast is being forged. That is often how the deepest changes happen, not as spectacle, but as routine repeated until it becomes a system. The morning air is cool for a little while, with mist rising off the river and the smell of wet reeds drifting through the pale light. A cartwheel grinds over damp earth. Somewhere a cow lows. Somewhere else an axe strikes wood with a flat, ringing certainty. You breathe in smoke from a waking hearth, and the bitter green scent of tobacco leaves bruised by handling. The colony feels unfinished to the eye, but its intentions are becoming more finished by the year. That is the contrast that matters. Rough buildings, rough roads, rough manners, and yet a sharpening social vision about who will labour, who will command, and who will inherit both status and vulnerability. By 1670, black people in the English colonies are already central to the whole enterprise. Though colonial language works hard to hide that fact beneath categories of property and service. The fields depend on black labour. The kitchens depend on black labour. The river landings, workshops, cabins, nurseries, and yards depend on black labour. More than that, the colony is being culturally altered by black presence at every level, through food, language, music, knowledge of healing, child rearing, craft, and the simple human insistence on surviving with some shape of self intact. The system wants labour only. It receives a people. A mainstream fact of this era is that the late 17th century marks a decisive turn toward hereditary, race-based slavery in the English mainland colonies. The trend does not fall from the sky in one clean moment, but by this point the direction is plain. Planters want labour for life. Lawmakers want categories that reduce dispute. Merchants want reliable supply. White colonists of many ranks are being taught to think of blackness as a condition tied to subordination. The choices hardening now will become the scaffolding of a much larger American order. You can almost hear the future in the language of the present. A planter talks about increase, meaning children born into bondage. A clerk speaks of property security, meaning fewer paths to freedom. A magistrate speaks of peace, meaning a more disciplined hierarchy. A poor white labourer speaks with sudden pride about his colour, even if his pockets are empty and his back is bent. Each phrase sounds local and ordinary. Together they form a programme. The colony is teaching itself how to make slavery feel natural. What makes this so chilling is that many people building the future cannot or will not see its full shape. They are solving immediate problems as they understand them. Labour shortage, profit margins, disorder, inheritance disputes, fear of rebellion. The result, however, is larger than any single motive. A child born in such a colony will inherit not merely land patterns and work routines, but a world increasingly trained to read Skinner's destiny. The habit settles into courts, churches, households, and imaginations all at once. You walk a road where dust rises dry by midday and settles on your ankles in a fine layer. The sun presses against your shoulders. Grasshoppers burst from the ditch and vanish again. Ahead, a planter's house sits on a slight rise, with yards, outbuildings, and labouring bodies arranged around it in a pattern that looks efficient from a distance. Stand close enough, though, and the pattern becomes intimate. A woman carrying water, a man splitting rails, a child minding another child, an older person rubbing a stiff wrist between tasks. Great systems are made from very small human burdens accumulated without mercy. There is a strange arrogance in colonial confidence. Men who still die young from fever, argue over muddy boundaries, and live in settlements vulnerable to crop failure, somehow believe they possess the wisdom to rank whole peoples permanently. Their houses leak, their roads disappear in rain, their medicine is uncertain, their politics are petty. Yet they speak with complete assurance about who is fit to rule and who is fit to serve forever. History contains many grand ironies. Few are as bitter as insecure societies claiming perfect certainty about human worth, and yet, from your place inside this world, you also sense another future forming. One colonial power cannot fully measure. Black communities are not static masses receiving domination in silence. They are creating habits of survival that will echo forward. Family bonds, even when threatened. Spiritual forms, even when hidden. Knowledge of land, plants, weather, labour, and human character. Ways of laughing under pressure. Ways of mourning, naming, singing, and refusing. These things are not simply private comforts. They are foundations. What begins as endurance can become tradition. What survives one generation can steady the next. A quirky and revealing detail of this transitional world is how much importance rests in things colonial elites barely bother to notice. The way a pot is seasoned, the song pattern used to soothe a child, the herbs hung to dry in a corner, the story told after dark about a clever creature who escapes the stronger one, the head wrap tied with deliberate neatness. None of these appear very large to those writing laws, but in the long life of a people, such details can carry continuity more faithfully than official records ever do. You hear the colony making itself in sound, hammers on wood, hoes striking packed soil, church bells travelling weakly through damp air, dogs barking at movement near the road, the scrape of a bench in a rough cabin, low conversation by firelight after dark, a child reciting a name, a woman humming over washwater. These sounds do not announce nation-building in the grand way later generations like to imagine. Still, they are nation-building of a sort. They reveal who is forced to construct the place, and who gets remembered as its founder. Historians still debate how fully the people of 1670 understood the long-term consequences of the changes unfolding around them. Did planters imagine the mature plantation order to come? Or were they merely reaching for immediate labour control? Did ordinary white colonists consciously embrace racial ideology? Or did they drift into it through law and custom? The evidence suggests a mix of intention and accumulation. Some knew exactly what kind of permanent advantage they wanted. Others accepted benefits without asking enough questions. Either way, the structure deepened. For black people, the future is felt not as abstract theory, but as tightening possibility. A mother sees it in what may happen to her children. A man sees it in the way his skill does not improve his legal condition. A young person sees it in the difference between their horizon and that of a white servant nearing the end of a term. The future arrives first as a shrinking of options. Only later will textbooks give it names. You pass a burial ground where the grass moves lightly in the late wind. The place is quiet except for insects and a bird calling from the tree line. Death is always close in the 17th century, but so is memory. Each grave marks a life lived within this brutal transition. Some who lie here were born in Africa, some were born in the colonies, some may have believed freedom, service, kinship, or conversion could still alter their path. Others likely understood with painful clarity that the walls were rising. None of them lived outside history. They were history, pressed into the earth before the full scale of it could be spoken. What is being forged in 1670 is not only slavery as labour arrangement. It is a racial common sense. That phrase sounds polite, which is perhaps appropriate for such a dangerous thing. It means the colony is learning habits of mind, whom to suspect, whom to pity, whom to fear, whom to command. Which child's future feels open, and which child's future feels owned. Once those habits settle, they reproduce themselves almost without instruction. A law can begin the work. 1,000 ordinary interactions finish it. You see this in the smallest scenes. A white child watches how adults speak to a black elder and learns disrespect before he learns grammar. A poor white man is offered a status in place of comfort and accepts the bargain. A churchman speaks of the soul while stepping carefully around the body's chains. A merchant counts labourers as assets in the same breath as barrels and acreage. A woman with authority in the household disciplines those beneath her, because hierarchy offers one of the few forms of power available to her. Each person contributes a little. The result is huge, and still, the future remains imperfectly controlled. That is the part that keeps the story human. Systems harden, yes, but human beings keep producing more life than systems know how to contain. Black children grow into adults with memories, humour, preferences, and skills of interpretation sharpened by necessity. New arrivals from Africa bring languages, knowledge, and sacred worlds colonists do not understand. Existing communities absorb, reshape, and teach. The colony tries to reduce people to labour categories. People keep becoming persons anyway. The air changes toward evening. Heat leaves the ground slowly, as if reluctant to surrender. Smoke from cooking fires rises in blue strips. A ladle taps a kettle. Someone coughs. Someone else laughs once, unexpectedly bright. The sky fades through amber into a softer grey blue, and for a moment the settlement looks almost gentle. That gentleness is deceptive, but it is not unreal. Life contains beauty even inside violent structures. Black people in the colony are not only suffering figures in the margins of someone else's project, they create beauty, order, attachment, and intelligence within the very world trying to deny them all four. Another scholarly uncertainty lingers over this threshold year. How inevitable was the full racial order that followed? Could another labour system have prevailed? Could ambiguity have lasted longer? Allowing more mixed statuses and different alliances, historians answer carefully. Many forces pushed toward the outcome that emerged, including profit, imperial competition, legal innovation, and elite fear. Yet inevitability is a dangerous word. It makes cruelty sound like weather. The colony did not drift into slavery by accident. People made choices, rewarded choices, wrote choices into law, and taught those choices to children. That is why 1670 matters so much. It shows slavery not as a finished monument but as a construction site. The beams are going up, the rooms are being assigned, the doors are being locked. Once you see it in this stage, you cannot pretend later that it simply always existed. You see the hands that built it. You also see the hands that cooked, planted, repaired, healed, comforted, prayed, and resisted under its rising frame. Those hands belong to the people whose lives gave the colony its substance, even while the colony tried to deny them full belonging. Night comes more gently now, the sounds lower. A child is carried half asleep across a yard. A man sits on a stool outside a cabin for 1 extra minute before going in. A woman checks a pot, then looks up briefly at the darkening sky as if taking one quiet thing for herself. Somewhere, beyond what you can see, another baby has been born into this world, and somewhere else an old person has died. The colony continues in that rhythm. Birth and death, labour and law, cruelty and care. You begin to understand that the deepest truth of life for Black Americans in 1670 is not only that slavery is taking hold, it is that a whole people are living through the taking hold while remaining fully human inside it. They are not waiting for history to arrive. They are already making family, culture, endurance, and meaning in conditions meant to crush all four. The future America that will grow from this soil will owe them more than it is willing to confess for a very long time. So you let the darkness settle around the cabins, the fields, the riverbank, and the rough roads. You listen to the frogs, the distant murmur of voices, the soft shift of someone turning towards sleep. The structure being built in 1670 is terrible, but within and against it, another structure is being built as well, quieter and more durable in its own way. Memory, kinship, belief, skill, refusal. The colony cannot stop itself from becoming a slave society. It also cannot stop black people from becoming the makers of a living legacy far larger than the cage prepared for them. Now the night deepens, and the sharp edges begin to soften. The smoke thins in the air. The river loses its shape and becomes only a dark ribbon under a quiet sky. One by one, the sounds of labour disappear, replaced by the gentler sounds of rest, breathing, crickets, a low ember settling in the hearth. You no longer need to hold every fact so tightly in your mind. You can let the world drift around you. Picture the cabins growing still. Picture the fields resting at last, the leaves no longer handled, the tools laid down, the roads empty except for moonlight. Picture a mother drawing a blanket over a sleeping child. Picture an old story held in the mouth for one more generation. Picture a prayer spoken so softly it barely stirs the air. In that quiet, history does not vanish. It simply becomes less harsh at the edges, more like a distant tide moving in the dark. You let your thoughts slow. The names, the laws, the labour, the fear, the courage, all of it begins to settle like dust after a long day. What remains is the human presence at the centre of the story. People cooking, carrying, mending, loving, grieving, hoping and enduring. People making a little warmth where they can. People refusing, in ways both large and small, to let the soul be fully claimed by the world around them. The night breeze moves through grass and along the riverbank. The stars, where the clouds permit them, seem patient and far away. Somewhere a child sighs in sleep. Somewhere an ember glows red. Then dimmer, then red again. The colony, for all its harshness, is quiet now. And in that quiet, you can rest with the knowledge that those who lived this life were never only victims of a system. They were also carriers of memory, makers of culture, guardians of one another, and witnesses whose lives still matter. So let the darkness hold the roads, the trees, the cabins, and the river. Let the voices fade into a hush. Let the heaviness of the story become gentler as it moves farther into the night. You have walked through a world of hard ground and hard choices, and now you can step away from it slowly, leaving the fires low, the fields sleeping, and the sky wide above everything. Sleep comes quietly here.